In the middle of the wild mountains, a wounded millionaire woman lay on the brink of death. When all hope seemed lost, two poor black boys appeared. Risking everything, they brought her to their small home and cared for her with the little they had. But they didn't know that single act of kindness would spark a story that would change all their lives forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The forest breathed with ancient rhythms. Shafts of afternoon sunlight pierced the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in patterns of gold and shadow. It was magnificent, serene yet somehow overwhelming, nature in its purest form, utterly indifferent to human presence. Eleanor Hayes adjusted the straps of her high-tech backpack and exhaled slowly, her breath misting slightly in the cool mountain air. At 62 years old, Eleanor was no stranger to the wilderness. Despite being a self-made millionaire with every comfort money could buy, she found her truest peace far from civilization. Nature, she often reminded herself, was where a person could truly hear their own thoughts. Dressed in premium hiking gear, boots engineered for rugged terrain, moisture-wicking layers, and a weatherproof jacket that cost more than most people's monthly rent, Eleanor felt prepared for anything these Colorado mountains might present. Or so she believed. The expedition had begun like countless others. Eleanor had parked her luxury SUV near a remote trailhead, miles from the nearest town. She'd planned a 3-day solo trek, carefully mapping her intended route. Her backpack carried premium energy bars, purified water, a comprehensive first aid kit, and a GPS device designed to function even in areas with no cellular signal. The morning had been invigorating. Bluebirds darted between the aspens, and chipmunks scurried across fallen logs. Eleanor walked with confident strides, her boots crunching on the carpet of pine needles. She paused frequently to photograph rare wildflowers and unusual rock formations with her professional-grade camera. "Perfect," she murmured, capturing a particularly stunning shot of sunlight filtering through the trees like cathedral windows. Around midday, Eleanor stopped beside a crystal-clear stream to refill her water bottle using a portable filtration system. The cold water tasted pure and refreshing. She checked her watch, plenty of time before she needed to set up camp for the night. But the forest, as beautiful as it was, held hidden dangers. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor veered off the marked trail, captivated by the sight of a vibrant bird with stunning crimson feathers and a distinctive crest. She followed its path through the trees, snapping pictures as it flitted from branch to branch. Each step took her deeper into the woods, farther from the safety of her planned route. "Just one more shot," she whispered, adjusting her camera's focus. The bird perched momentarily on a low branch, then took flight again, leading her toward a steep incline. Without warning, the ground collapsed beneath Eleanor's feet. The soft, rain-soaked soil crumbled, and she tumbled down the slope. Rocks and roots scraped against her arms and legs as she fell, her camera flying from her grasp. She landed with a sickening thud at the bottom, the breath knocked completely from her lungs. For several moments, Eleanor lay motionless, dazed and disoriented. Pain flared in her right leg, and when she managed to sit up, she saw a long, angry gash running from her knee to her shin. Blood seeped through the fabric of her hiking pants, staining the khaki fabric a deep crimson. She tried to stand but winced as sharp pain shot up her leg like lightning. "Wonderful," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Just wonderful." As the sun began its descent, Eleanor realized the true gravity of her situation. Her GPS device had been damaged in the fall, its screen spider-webbed with cracks and completely unresponsive. Her phone, tucked safely in her backpack, displayed the disheartening message "no signal." She was alone, injured, and far off her planned trail. That night, Eleanor managed to set up a makeshift camp at the base of the slope. Using what remained of her strength, she gathered dry branches and started a small fire with the emergency lighter from her pack. The warmth of the flames offered small comfort, but it did little to ease her growing anxiety. As darkness swallowed the forest, the sounds around her transformed. The cheerful chirping of daytime birds gave way to the eerie calls of nocturnal creatures. Twigs snapped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at unseen animals moving through the underbrush. An owl hooted somewhere overhead, its call echoing through the trees. Eleanor stared into the fire, her face illuminated by its flickering glow. Her mind raced with worry. Would anyone find her? How long could she survive out here? Her rations were limited, and her injured leg made travel nearly impossible. She tried to remember the survival training she'd taken years ago. Keep warm, stay hydrated, don't panic. But the pain in her leg was intensifying, and she worried about infection. She'd cleaned the wound as best she could with her first aid supplies, but without proper medical attention, who knew what could happen? The night stretched endlessly. Eleanor dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Once she heard heavy footsteps nearby, and froze in terror, certain a bear was approaching. But whatever it was moved on, leaving her trembling in the darkness. By the second day, she tried climbing back toward the slope but slid down halfway, then gave up and started moving along the base instead. The dense forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. No matter how far she limped, she couldn't find her way back to the trailhead. The sun was higher now, beating down through gaps in the canopy. Eleanor's lips were cracked and dry despite her careful rationing of water. Her supply was running dangerously low. She had perhaps 2 bottles left, and she'd seen no streams since yesterday. She began rationing her food, nibbling only small amounts to make it last. Every step was agony, her injured leg throbbing with each movement. The once pristine forest now felt like an endless maze, its towering trees and dense foliage offering no clues about where she was or which direction led to safety. Eleanor tried to use the sun to navigate, remembering that it rose in the east and set in the west, but the heavy canopy made it difficult to track the sun's position, and her growing disorientation made it hard to think clearly. She'd read somewhere that lost hikers often walked in circles without realizing it. Was she doing the same? She found a fallen log and sat heavily, her hands shaking as she opened another energy bar. The sweet taste made her nauseous, but she forced herself to eat. She needed the calories, needed the strength. Eleanor shouted for help periodically, her voice growing hoarse and desperate with each attempt. "Hello, is anyone out there?" The only response was the indifferent echo of her own voice bouncing back through the trees, mocking her isolation. Birds continued their songs overhead, squirrels chattered and leaped between branches. The forest was alive with activity, yet she had never felt more alone. That afternoon, Eleanor tried to fashion a walking stick from a fallen branch, hoping it would help her move more easily. But the effort exhausted her, and she made pitifully little progress before needing to rest again. By the third night, exhaustion and hunger had taken their devastating toll. Eleanor leaned against a massive oak tree, her body trembling from fatigue and cold. Her once pristine hiking clothes were now tattered and stained with dirt and blood. She hadn't seen another human soul in days, and the isolation weighed on her like a physical burden. She thought about her life back in Denver, her successful tech company, her beautiful penthouse, her circle of wealthy acquaintances. She'd built that company from nothing, working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing relationships and health for success. She'd thought herself invincible, capable of conquering any challenge through sheer determination and resources. But money meant nothing here. Her expensive gear couldn't save her. Her business acumen was useless against the indifferent wilderness. By the end of the third day, only 1 bottle remained. By morning it was gone. She sucked at the cap just to taste the memory of water, her vision blurred. She fell twice trying to stand, then began crawling again, dirt grinding into her palms. She thought she heard someone calling her name. "Eleanor." She blinked up at the trees. No one was there, only the whisper of wind through pine needles. When she finally collapsed beside a fallen log, she was no longer sure if she was awake. Her breathing came shallow and slow. She stared at the canopy above, the same forest she had admired, now an unfeeling cathedral of green and gold, and then just as her consciousness began to fade, she heard it. At first faint, then clearer. Laughter, high, bright human laughter. She tried to lift her head, disbelief flooding through her exhaustion. For a moment she thought she was hallucinating again. Then came another sound, a shout, a footstep, leaves crunching. She managed a ragged cry, barely more than a whisper. "Hello, is anyone out there? Please, I need help." Eleanor's heart leaped. She stopped in her tracks, straining to listen over the pounding of her own pulse. "Over there," a young voice called out, filled with urgency. "I heard something." "Are you sure?" Another voice responded, deeper but still youthful. "Could be an animal." "No, it sounded like a person." "Come on." A moment later, 2 figures emerged from the trees. They were boys, teenagers with sun-bronzed skin, their simple clothes slightly worn but sturdy. The older one, perhaps 17, carried an axe over his shoulder, his frame already showing the lean muscle of someone who did physical labor daily. The younger, maybe 14, held a bundle of traps in his hands, his face open and expressive. Eleanor stared at them, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to speak, but could only manage a weak croak. "Help." The older boy approached cautiously, his sharp blue eyes scanning Eleanor from head to toe. There was a wariness in his expression, the careful assessment of someone who'd learned not to rush into situations blindly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. The younger boy rushed forward without hesitation, dropping his traps with a clatter. His reaction was immediate, emotional, so different from his brother's measured response. "Thomas, she looks hurt, bad," he said, his voice rising with alarm. He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening with compassion. "Don't worry, ma'am, we'll help you." For the first time in days, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. These boys were her lifeline in a forest that had seemed intent on swallowing her whole. Thomas's sharp eyes darted between Eleanor's pale face and the makeshift bandage on her leg. His instincts kicked in as he assessed the situation, checking her level of consciousness, noting her dehydration, evaluating whether she could walk. "She's not going to make it out of here on her own," Thomas muttered, half to himself. "We have to do something. We can't just leave her here," the younger boy said urgently, his face tight with worry. He knelt beside Eleanor, who was slumped against the tree, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. The boy placed a tentative hand on her arm, his touch gentle. "Ma'am, can you stand?" Eleanor tried to speak, but her voice cracked, barely audible. "I try." The effort made her head swim. She braced herself against the tree trunk, trembling as she attempted to push up with her uninjured leg. The pain shot through her shin like fire, and she collapsed back down with a grunt of frustration. The younger boy looked at Thomas, panic creeping into his voice. "Thomas, we can't leave her." Thomas nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "We won't, Samuel, we'll help her." He turned to Eleanor, his voice calm and steady, the voice of someone used to taking charge in difficult situations. "Ma'am, we're going to get you out of here. It's not far to our place, but you'll have to lean on us. Can you do that?" Eleanor glanced between the two boys, her weary eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. These kids, barely old enough to be on their own, were stepping in to help a woman they'd never met. In her world, people didn't help without expecting something in return. But these boys seemed genuinely concerned, asking nothing. "Thank you," she rasped, her throat dry and parched. "Thank you so much." Thomas stepped beside Eleanor, looping her arm over his shoulder, careful to avoid the injured leg. Despite his youth, his movements were confident, practiced. Samuel positioned himself on the other side, offering support. The boys exchanged a quick look, their unspoken coordination clear. They'd worked together like this before. "Lean on us, ma'am," Samuel said gently. "We'll take it slow. Don't try to walk on that leg if it hurts too much. We're strong enough to carry most of your weight." Eleanor nodded, her head feeling heavy. Each step was agony, the injured leg dragging uselessly as the boys bore the brunt of her weight. They moved slowly, carefully navigating the uneven terrain. Twigs snapped beneath their feet, and the distant call of a hawk echoed through the thick canopy above. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they trudged forward. Eleanor's body ached with exhaustion, but the boys' steady presence kept her moving. She was amazed by their strength, not just physical, though they were clearly capable, but their emotional strength. Most teenagers would have panicked or complained. These two simply did what needed to be done. Samuel, despite his smaller frame, chatted softly, his voice a constant reassurance. Eleanor realized he was doing it deliberately, keeping her conscious and focused. "What's your name, ma'am?" Samuel asked after a while, glancing up at Eleanor. "Eleanor," she replied weakly. "Eleanor Hayes." "Well, Miss Eleanor, we're almost out of the thickest part of the forest," Samuel said, his tone as bright as he could muster. "Just a bit further, okay? You're doing great. You must be really tough to have survived out there for days." Eleanor gave a faint nod, her lips twitching into something resembling a smile. You can just call me Eleanor, and I'm not tough. I was terrified." "Being tough doesn't mean you're not scared," Thomas said quietly. "It means you keep going even when you are." The simple wisdom of his words struck Eleanor deeply. This boy, who couldn't be more than 17, understood something that had taken her decades to learn. As they walked, Eleanor couldn't help but notice the quiet efficiency with which the brothers moved. Thomas led with calm confidence, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings for potential hazards: a jutting root, a slippery patch of moss, an unstable rock. Samuel, though younger, had an infectious energy that seemed to make the arduous task feel less daunting. His constant chatter wasn't empty. He pointed out interesting trees, told her about the wildlife they sometimes saw, shared stories that kept her mind off the pain. "You boys live out here?" Eleanor asked between labored breaths, her curiosity cutting through her exhaustion. Thomas answered without looking back. "We live with our grandfather. He raised us after our dad passed. It's just the three of us now." Samuel chimed in, his voice softer now. "We come out here a lot to chop wood, set traps, and sometimes just to explore. It's how we help Grandpa keep things running. He used to do it all himself, but his back isn't what it used to be, so now it's mostly us." Eleanor frowned, her heart tightening at the thought of these two boys bearing so much responsibility at such a young age. "That's a lot for you to take on," she said quietly. Thomas glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "We do what we have to. Grandpa did the same for us when we needed him. That's what family does." The simple statement carried such weight. Eleanor thought about her own family, scattered, distant, connected more by obligation than genuine care. When had that happened? When had success replaced connection in her list of priorities? After what felt like an eternity, the dense forest began to thin, and a small clearing came into view. In the middle of it stood a modest wooden cabin, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. The structure was old but well maintained. Someone clearly took pride in keeping it up. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, and the faint smell of something savory wafted through the crisp evening air. A small vegetable garden grew to one side of the cabin, the plants showing careful tending. Firewood was stacked neatly against the outside wall, covered with a tarp to keep it dry. A few chickens pecked at the ground near a small coop. It was modest, humble, but there was something deeply appealing about it, a sense of home that Eleanor's expensive penthouse had never achieved. "We're here," Thomas said, his voice laced with relief. "Come on, let's get you inside." Samuel dashed ahead to open the door, calling out as he did, "Grandpa, we found someone in the woods. She's hurt." The door creaked open, revealing a man in his early 70s with a flannel shirt and worn jeans. His weathered face, lined with age and wisdom, lit up with concern as he stepped outside. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been through hard years of labor, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "What happened?" he asked, his voice warm but firm, with a distinctive Appalachian accent that spoke of deep roots in these mountains. "She fell and got hurt," Thomas explained as he helped Eleanor toward the cabin. "She's been out there for days. From what we can tell, she's dehydrated and exhausted." The man's eyes softened as he took in Eleanor's disheveled appearance. "Oh, you poor woman. Come in, come in. Let's get you warm and taken care of." He held the door wider, and the boys carefully maneuvered Eleanor inside. The cabin was small but cozy. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The furniture was simple: well-worn chairs, a sturdy handmade table, and a faded braided rug that added warmth to the wooden floor. The walls were decorated with old photographs in simple frames, family memories spanning decades. A bookshelf held a mix of practical volumes and what looked like well-loved novels. The scent of vegetable stew filled the air, and Eleanor's stomach growled involuntarily. "Sit her down here," the man instructed, gesturing to a chair near the fire. It was clearly his chair, an old recliner with a blanket draped over one arm and a side table holding reading glasses and a book. Thomas and Samuel carefully lowered Eleanor into the seat. The warmth of the fire was immediate, seeping into her chilled bones. She felt herself beginning to thaw, and with the warmth came an overwhelming wave of emotion. She'd been so close to dying out there. The man, who introduced himself as Henry Mitchell, "No relation to you, I'm guessing," he joked with a small laugh, his eyes crinkling with warmth, brought over a bowl of steaming stew. "Eat this," he said gently, placing the bowl in her hands along with a spoon. "Take it slow now. Your stomach needs to adjust. It'll help you get your strength back." Eleanor accepted the bowl with trembling hands, murmuring a quiet thank you. The first spoonful was a revelation, hearty, savory, and nourishing. Chunks of potato, carrot, and what tasted like venison floated in a rich broth seasoned with herbs. It was the first real food she'd had in days, and she could feel her body responding almost immediately, warmth spreading through her limbs. "Slow down," Henry said kindly, noticing how quickly she was eating. "I know you're hungry, but you need to pace yourself or you'll make yourself sick." Eleanor nodded, forcing herself to eat more slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to devour the entire bowl. As she ate, Henry knelt by her injured leg, his weathered hands deftly unwrapping the makeshift bandage. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd treated wounds before, his own and others. "It's not too deep, thank goodness," he said, inspecting the wound carefully. "But it's getting infected. See this redness here? We need to clean it up properly and wrap it with clean bandages. You're lucky the boys found you when they did." Thomas fetched a clean cloth and a small bottle of antiseptic, handing them to his grandfather. Samuel hovered nearby, his wide eyes watching every move with concern. "Does it hurt a lot?" Samuel asked, his voice full of genuine worry. Eleanor shook her head, though the sting of the antiseptic made her wince sharply. "I'll be fine thanks to you boys. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "Don't think about that now," Henry said, his voice gruff but kind. "You're safe now, that's what matters." Later that evening, as Eleanor sat by the fire with her leg properly bandaged and her stomach full for the first time in days, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the kindness she'd been shown. These people, who had so little themselves, had gone out of their way to help a complete stranger. The cabin was warm, almost too warm after days in the cold forest, but Eleanor welcomed it. Samuel had given her a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar, and she wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling truly safe for the first time since her fall. "You saved me," Eleanor said quietly, looking at Thomas and Samuel. "I don't know how to thank you." Thomas shrugged, his face calm but resolute. "You don't have to thank us. You needed help, and we were there. That's all." Henry smiled warmly from his rocking chair, working on whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. The shavings fell into a basket at his feet. "That's how we've always done things around here. You help when you can, no matter who it is. My father taught me that, and I've tried to teach these boys the same." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I don't know many people who would do what you did." Samuel grinned, his youthful energy shining through, even after the long day. "We're not like most people, Miss Eleanor." "Tell me about yourselves," Eleanor said, genuinely curious. "How long have you lived here?" Henry set down his whittling and leaned back in his chair. "This cabin's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it back in 1928, raised my father here, and my father raised me here. I raised my son here too." His voice caught slightly on the last words, and Eleanor saw Thomas and Samuel exchange a glance. "Our dad died 6 years ago," Thomas said quietly. "Logging accident. A tree fell the wrong way." "I'm so sorry," Eleanor said, her heart aching for them. "Grandpa took us in," Samuel continued. "Our mom had left when we were little. She didn't like the isolation, couldn't handle the hard life out here. So it's always been just us and Dad, and then just us and Grandpa." Henry reached over and squeezed Samuel's shoulder. "These boys are the best thing in my life. They work hard, never complain. I couldn't ask for better grandsons." Over the next few days, as Eleanor recovered her strength, she learned more about the Mitchell family and their way of life. She discovered that Henry's pension from his logging days was barely enough to cover basics. The boys supplemented their income in whatever ways they could, selling firewood to folks who lived closer to town, trapping furs that they sold to a trader who came through twice a year, and occasionally doing odd jobs for neighbors who lived miles away. Thomas showed her his workshop, a small shed behind the cabin where he crafted furniture and repaired tools. His work was impressive, showing both skill and artistic sensibility. "I taught myself mostly," he said modestly when Eleanor praised a beautifully carved chair. "Watched some videos at the library in town when we go for supplies. Practiced a lot." Samuel showed her his drawings, sketches of animals and plants he'd observed in the forest. "I want to be a wildlife biologist someday," he confided. "But college costs money we don't have." so mostly I just draw what I see and read whatever books I can find at the library. Eleanor felt her heart breaking for these boys, so much potential, so much talent, held back by circumstances beyond their control. Yet despite their struggles, they possessed a quiet dignity and warmth that Eleanor found profoundly moving. They laughed easily, found joy in simple things, and treated each other with genuine affection and respect. One evening, Henry told stories about the forest, about the time he'd encountered a black bear and her cubs, about the harsh winter when the snow had been so deep they couldn't leave the cabin for 3 weeks, about the day Thomas had caught his first rabbit in a trap he'd made himself. "This land can be harsh," Henry said, staring into the fire. "But it's honest. It doesn't care about your bank account or your fancy degrees. It only cares if you're willing to work and if you respect it." Eleanor thought about her own life. The constant hustle, the business deals, the political maneuvering required to stay on top. Nothing about it had been honest. Everything had been about image, about strategy, about winning. "You've built something real here," Eleanor said softly. "Something that matters." Henry looked at her with his wise, weathered eyes. "We've built a life, Miss Eleanor. Not a fancy one, but it's ours. These boys know who they are and what they stand for. Can't put a price on that." As the days passed, Eleanor insisted on helping out, though Henry was quick to tell her to rest. "You're still healing," he said, wagging a finger at her. "You don't need to worry about anything." But Eleanor, not one to sit idle, found small ways to pitch in. She helped Samuel with his correspondence courses. He was working through high school curriculum remotely, determined to graduate despite the challenges of rural isolation. She was impressed by his intelligence and his determination to keep learning despite the obstacles. She helped fold laundry, wash dishes, and even attempted to help with cooking, though she quickly discovered that her skills in that area were severely limited. "You've never cooked a meal from scratch, have you?" Henry asked, amused as she struggled to peel potatoes. "I've had assistants and chefs my whole adult life," Eleanor admitted sheepishly. "This is humbling." "Nothing wrong with learning something new," Henry said. "Here, let me show you the trick to it." She helped Thomas stack the firewood the boys had collected, pausing occasionally to catch her breath. The physical effort felt good, grounding her after days of helplessness. As they worked, Thomas talked about his dreams. "I'd like to have my own carpentry business someday," he said, running his hand along a piece of wood. "Build custom furniture, maybe even houses, but you need capital to start a business, and we barely have enough to get by." Eleanor listened, saying little, but her mind was already working. She saw in Thomas the same drive and determination that had propelled her own success. He just needed an opportunity. One afternoon, Samuel showed her his favorite spot, a rocky outcrop about a half-mile from the cabin that offered a stunning view of the valley below. They sat together, watching the sun begin its descent. "Do you ever feel trapped here?" Eleanor asked gently. Samuel considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I see stuff online at the library, all these places I'll probably never go, all these things I'll probably never do. But then I come up here and remember how beautiful this place is. How lucky I am to have Grandpa and Thomas. How many people never have what I have, people who really love them." His wisdom struck Eleanor deeply. This 14-year-old boy understood something profound that she was only just beginning to grasp. After a week of recovery, Eleanor knew her strength had returned enough for her to leave. She'd used Henry's old radio to contact the Forest Service, and they'd arranged to meet her at a clearing 2 miles away the following morning. Her assistant Margaret had been frantic, and Eleanor had assured her she was fine, glossing over the details of her ordeal. That final evening, after another hearty meal of stew and homemade bread, Eleanor stood and faced the Mitchell family, her heart heavy with gratitude but also with purpose. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me," she began, her voice sincere. "You saved my life, and I'll never forget it, but I want to do something for you in return." Henry shook his head, his expression kind but firm. "Miss Eleanor, we didn't help you for a reward. Seeing you safe and well is all we need." "I understand that," Eleanor replied gently. "But please let me help you. I have the means to make things a little easier for your family." Thomas folded his arms, his face thoughtful but wary. "We don't need much, ma'am. We've been fine on our own." Eleanor smiled, meeting Thomas's steady gaze. "I know you don't need much. But wouldn't it be nice for your grandfather to have a little less to worry about?" or for you boys to have the chance to pursue your dreams. Thomas, you should have the capital to start that carpentry business. Samuel, you should be able to go to college and become that wildlife biologist. Thomas glanced at Henry, uncertainty flickering across his face. Henry hesitated before speaking. You've already been so kind, Miss Eleanor, but what did you have in mind? Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope filled with cash, $5,000 that she'd had Samuel help her retrieve from her emergency stash in her backpack. This is just a start, she said, holding it out to Henry. To cover repairs for the cabin, supplies or anything else you need. The room fell silent. Samuel's eyes widened as he stared at the envelope, but Henry shook his head firmly. We can't take your money, Miss Eleanor. It wouldn't feel right. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice soft but insistent. Please think of it as an investment in your family's future. You helped me when I needed it most. Let me do the same for you. I built my company from nothing. I know what people can achieve when they're given a chance. Thomas has the skill and work ethic to build a successful business. Samuel has the intelligence to excel in college. Don't let lack of money hold them back. Henry looked at his grandsons, seeing the hope flickering in their eyes despite their attempts to hide it. His resolve wavered. It's too much, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's not nearly enough, Eleanor replied. But it's a beginning. Finally Henry nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. Thank you, he whispered. We'll use it wisely, I promise you that. Eleanor smiled, but she knew this wasn't enough. An idea had been forming in her mind over the past few days, something bigger than a one-time gift, but she kept those plans to herself for now. The next morning, Thomas and Samuel helped Eleanor pack her belongings and led her to the edge of the forest, where a Forest Service vehicle was waiting. The ranger who'd come to collect her looked her over with professional concern. You're lucky, ma'am, he said. We get calls like this sometimes. They don't always end well. I know, Eleanor said quietly. I was very lucky. Before climbing into the truck, Eleanor turned to the boys. She pulled out a card from her wallet and handed it to Thomas. This has my personal phone number and email, she said. Please stay in touch. I meant what I said about wanting to help. Thomas took the card, handling it carefully. We will, thank you, Miss Eleanor, for everything. Samuel surprised her by throwing his arms around her in a quick hug. Take care of yourself. And maybe stay on the marked trails from now on. Eleanor laughed, hugging him back. Definitely learned that lesson. She shook Henry's hand, holding it between both of hers. You've raised remarkable young men. Their father would be proud. Henry's eyes grew misty. That means more than you know. As the truck drove away, Eleanor glanced in the side mirror, watching the three of them wave until they disappeared from view. Her heart was full, but her mind was already racing with plans. Back in Denver, Eleanor's return caused quite a stir. Margaret had nearly organized a full search and rescue operation, and was both relieved and annoyed when Eleanor appeared. You could have died out there, Margaret scolded, though her eyes were red from crying. What were you thinking, going out there alone at your age? I was thinking I needed solitude, Eleanor replied. But I found something much more valuable instead. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into work with renewed energy, but her focus had shifted. She began researching rural poverty, educational opportunities for rural youth, and programs that supported small business development in remote areas. She called Thomas twice during those first 2 weeks, checking on the family. The conversations were brief. The Mitchells weren't used to long phone calls, but Eleanor cherished them anyway. We used some of the money to fix the roof, Thomas reported during the second call. There were some leaks we'd been trying to patch ourselves, but it needed proper work. Grandpa's sleeping better now, not worrying about it. I'm glad, Eleanor said. And how are you doing? Good. Actually, I've been working on some designs for furniture pieces. Thought maybe I could start building up an inventory, if I'm really going to try this business thing. I'd love to see them, Eleanor said. Would you mind sending me photos? When the photos arrived via email, Thomas had used the computer at the town library. Eleanor was impressed. Thomas had real talent, and his designs were both beautiful and functional. An idea began to take shape. 3 weeks after Eleanor's return to Denver, she called an emergency meeting with her executive team. They gathered in her office, confused about the urgency. I've been thinking about the direction of our company, Eleanor began. We've been successful, profitable. But I want to know, what's our purpose beyond making money? Her chief financial officer, David Chen, looked uncomfortable. Our purpose is to create value for shareholders. That's not enough anymore, Eleanor said firmly. I want to start a new initiative, a foundation that supports rural communities, education, small business development, infrastructure improvement. I want it to be a core part of our company's mission. Her team exchanged uncertain glances. The marketing director, Jennifer Walsh, spoke up. Eleanor, that's admirable, but it's not exactly our expertise. We're a tech company. Then we'll hire people with expertise, Eleanor replied. I've seen firsthand how much talent exists in rural areas, hidden away because people lack opportunity. We're going to change that. Over the next month, Eleanor worked tirelessly on her plan. She consulted with non-profit experts, educational specialists, and community development professionals. She allocated $5 million of her personal wealth as seed money for what she called the Forest Gift Foundation. But she wanted the Mitchells involved from the start. They weren't just the inspiration, they needed to be partners in this endeavor. 6 weeks after her rescue, she called Thomas with a proposal. I have an idea I want to discuss with you. I'm starting a foundation to help rural families and communities. I'd like you to be part of it, as a consultant. You'd help us understand what these communities actually need, not what outsiders think they need. There was a long silence on the other end. Miss Eleanor, I'm just a 17-year-old kid who cuts wood and makes furniture. I don't know anything about foundations. You know more than you think, Eleanor insisted. You know what it's like to work hard and still struggle. You know what resources would actually make a difference. That knowledge is invaluable, and we'd compensate you properly for your time and expertise. Another pause. I'd need to talk to Grandpa and Samuel. Of course, think about it. But Thomas, this could be the start of that carpentry business you dreamed about. We'd help you establish it as part of the Foundation's small business initiative. You'd be proof that the model works. 4 days later, Thomas called back. We talked about it. Grandpa says we'd be foolish not to at least hear you out. And Samuel's excited about the possibility of the foundation helping with his education. Then come to Denver, Eleanor said. All 3 of you. I'll arrange transportation and lodging. Stay for a few days and let's see if we can build something meaningful together. The Mitchells made their first trip to Denver. Eleanor had arranged for a car service to pick them up. The drive was over 3 hours from their remote location. When they arrived in the city, the culture shock was immediate. Samuel pressed his face against the car window, staring up at the skyscrapers with wide eyes. It's like something from a movie, he breathed. Thomas was quieter, more reserved, but Eleanor noticed him taking in everything with careful attention. Henry looked uncomfortable in his Sunday best, a suit that was clean but clearly decades old. Eleanor had arranged for them to stay at a comfortable hotel, nice but not ostentatiously so. She'd learned enough about the family to know they'd be uncomfortable with excessive luxury. Still, the hotel room with its king-sized beds, flat-screen TV, and marble bathroom was probably the nicest place any of them had ever stayed. That first dinner together was awkward. The restaurant Eleanor had chosen was upscale, but not pretentious, yet the Mitchells clearly felt out of place. Other diners cast curious glances at Henry's weathered hands and the boy's simple clothes. Maybe this was a mistake, Henry muttered, studying the menu with its descriptions in French. It's not a mistake, Eleanor said firmly. But tomorrow we're going somewhere more comfortable. I forgot that I needed to meet you in your world before asking you into mine. The next day, Eleanor surprised them by taking them to a local diner, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and laminated menus. The Mitchells visibly relaxed. This is more like it, Samuel said, grinning as he ordered a burger and fries. Over breakfast, Eleanor laid out her vision. She'd brought charts and presentations, but halfway through she noticed Henry's eyes glazing over. She stopped. I'm doing this all wrong, aren't I? Thomas nodded slightly. It's a lot of business talk. We're not used to that. Eleanor put away her materials. Let me try again, simpler. I want to build community centers in rural areas, places where people can learn skills, get help with education, access resources they wouldn't otherwise have. I want to help people start small businesses by providing training and startup capital. And I want to improve infrastructure, better internet access, repairs to homes, that kind of thing. Why? Henry asked bluntly. You've got your money, you don't need to do this. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Because you reminded me that there's more to life than accumulating wealth. Because I was lost, not just in that forest but in life, and your family showed me what matters. I want to honor that by helping others. Samuel leaned forward. And you really want us involved, not just using our story but actually working with you. Absolutely. Thomas, I want you to help us understand what young people in rural areas need. Eventually I'd like you to run a carpentry training program. Samuel, as you continue your education, I'd like your input on conservation and environmental initiatives. And Henry, I need you to keep me honest, to make sure we're really helping people and not just imposing what we think they need. Henry studied her for a long moment. You really mean all this? I do. He extended his weathered hand across the table. Then we're in. But we do this right, Miss Eleanor. No cutting corners, no half measures. Eleanor shook his hand, smiling. I wouldn't have it any other way. They spent 3 days in Denver. Eleanor introduced them to her team, showed them her company, and walked them through detailed plans for the foundation. By the time they left, the Mitchells had agreed to serve as advisors, with Thomas receiving a modest monthly stipend for his consultation work. This is more money than I make in 3 months of woodworking, Thomas said, staring at the contract Eleanor had drawn up. You're worth it, Eleanor replied. Your insights will save us from making expensive mistakes. Over the next 4 months, Eleanor assembled a team of experts, but insisted that the Mitchells be consulted on every major decision. Thomas proved to have remarkable instincts about what would actually work in rural communities versus what looked good on paper but would fail in practice. You can't just drop a computer lab in a place with unreliable electricity, he pointed out during one planning meeting conducted via video call. You need to fix the infrastructure first, then add the technology. Eleanor and her team worked with architects to design a community center that would be practical, durable and affordable to replicate. They worked with educators to develop programs that would be genuinely useful. They worked with small business experts to create a loan and mentorship program. 6 months after Eleanor's rescue, they broke ground on the first community center in the area where the Mitchells lived. Eleanor had insisted on starting there, both to honor the family and to create a model they could learn from before expanding. The day of the groundbreaking, nearly everyone from the surrounding area came out. Word had spread about what was being built and why. Many were skeptical. Outsiders had made promises before that never materialized. Eleanor stood before the gathered crowd of about 75 people, Thomas and Samuel beside her. She'd learned to dress more practically when in rural areas, jeans, boots, a simple jacket. No need for business attire out here. I know some of you are wondering if this is real, Eleanor began. If we'll really follow through, all I can tell you is that this community saved my life, not just physically, but in ways that matter more. This foundation isn't charity, it's investment. Investment in talent, in resilience, in the values that your communities have preserved, even when the rest of the world forgot them. She gestured to Thomas. Thomas Mitchell is going to tell you more about what we're building here. Thomas stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. I know most of you. You've known me since I was little. You've watched Samuel and me grow up. You know our situation, that we've struggled like a lot of you have struggled. This center is going to offer practical things, computer access with training, workshops on everything from carpentry to small engine repair, to business skills, a space for kids to get homework help, and meeting rooms for community gatherings. But more than that, it's going to be a place that says your community matters, that you matter. The crowd was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in and soon the applause was thunderous. Over the next 5 months, the community center took shape. Local contractors were hired for the work. Eleanor had insisted on that, despite it costing more than bringing in outside companies. Thomas worked alongside them during his school breaks and weekends, learning construction techniques and earning respect for his willingness to do hard physical labor. Samuel, now 15, spent his time surveying community members about what programs they'd actually use. He discovered that many older residents were intimidated by technology but eager to learn. Young mothers needed childcare options so they could attend training sessions. Teenagers needed a safe place to gather that wasn't just hanging out in parking lots. Eleanor incorporated all of these insights into the final design. The center would have a small childcare room staffed by trained volunteers. It would offer technology classes specifically designed for seniors. It would have a game room and study area for teenagers. Henry became the unofficial liaison between the foundation and the community. People trusted him. He was one of them, had been for over 70 years. When he vouched for the foundation's intentions, people listened. Eleanor Hayes is the real deal, he told anyone who asked. I've seen how she works. She listens more than she talks. She admits when she's wrong, and she follows through on her promises. 11 months after, the community center opened its doors. The celebration was massive. Families came from miles around, nearly 200 people in total. Eleanor had arranged for food trucks to provide free meals, and local musicians played on a small stage constructed for the occasion. Thomas, now 18 years old, and having just graduated from high school, via his correspondence courses, had crafted the front doors himself. They were beautiful solid oak panels with carved designs representing the forest, trees, animals and flowing water. It was his first major commission, and he'd poured his heart into it. When the doors were unveiled, people gathered around to admire the craftsmanship. "You did this?" an older woman named Martha Patterson asked, running her hand along the smooth wood. Thomas nodded, bashful. "It's not perfect, but it's beautiful," she interrupted. "My late husband used to do woodworking before his arthritis got too bad. He would have loved to see this." Eleanor pulled Thomas aside during the celebration. "I have a proposition for you. The foundation needs someone to run the woodworking and carpentry programs here. It would be a paid position, not a fortune, but steady income. And you'd have access to professional tools and workspace. You could build your business while teaching others." Thomas's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Completely. You've proven yourself over these past months. You understand what people need. You communicate well, and your craftsmanship is excellent. You're perfect for this." Thomas looked over at Henry and Samuel, who were talking with neighbors. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but Thomas, you're 18 now. You've graduated high school. This is your chance to start building your future." 2 days later, Thomas accepted the position. Within the first month the center was bustling with activity. Eleanor had hired Martha Patterson, the woman who'd admired Thomas's doors, to serve as director. Martha had recently returned to the area after retiring from a 30-year career in education in Colorado Springs, and she brought both expertise and community knowledge to the role. The computer classes filled up immediately. Martha had to add extra sessions. The teenagers claimed the game room but also used the study area. Apparently having a designated cool place to do homework made it more socially acceptable. Thomas's basic carpentry classes on evenings and weekends attracted 12 students in the first session, ranging from a 16-year-old boy to a 62-year-old woman who'd always wanted to learn woodworking. "You're a natural teacher," Eleanor told him after observing one class during her monthly visit. "Have you thought about expanding this?" Thomas smiled. "Actually, yeah. What if we created a full apprenticeship program? Like a real vocational training where people could learn the trade properly over several months." "I think that's brilliant," Eleanor said. "Let's develop it." As the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's rescue approached, the foundation was thriving but facing new challenges. The center had served over 300 people in its first 6 months. Thomas's carpentry program had trained 24 students, 8 of whom had started taking on small paid projects. Samuel, now 15 and a half, had completed his sophomore year of high school through correspondence courses and was excelling. The foundation had established a scholarship fund, and Samuel would be its first recipient when he was ready for college. But Eleanor's work with the foundation was creating tension at her company. Several major investors, led by a vocal shareholder named Richard Brennan, questioned her focus. Eleanor Hayes seems to have forgotten that she's the CEO of a major tech company, Brennan told a business publication during an interview that was published just after the center's 6-month mark. Her focus should be on maximizing shareholder value, not playing philanthropist in rural Colorado. The article stung. Eleanor called an emergency board meeting at her company to address the concerns. "My work with the Forest Gift Foundation hasn't affected company performance," she said, presenting data. "In fact, employee morale is up 23% because we're part of something meaningful. We've received overwhelmingly positive press coverage. Our brand perception scores have improved significantly, and I'm more focused and energized than I've been in years." "That's all well and good," Brennan replied. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you get bored with your little rural project and move on to something else? You'll have raised expectations and then abandoned people." Eleanor felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. "I'm not going to abandon anything. This isn't a hobby or a novelty, it's a fundamental shift in how I understand success and purpose." "We'll see," Brennan said skeptically. The tension got to her. Eleanor found herself lying awake at night, questioning her decisions. Was she spreading herself too thin? Could she really manage both a company and a foundation? What if Brennan was right, and she was letting people down? She called Henry, needing his grounded perspective. "I'm worried I'm making promises I can't keep," she confessed. "What if I fail? What if the foundation collapses and leaves your community worse off than before?" Henry was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, do you remember what you told that crowd at the groundbreaking? You said this wasn't charity, it was investment." "Well, investments carry risk. We know that. We're not children. If you try your best and something doesn't work, we'll figure it out together. But if you don't try because you're scared of failing, then you've already failed. And that's not the woman my grandsons pulled out of those woods." His words steadied her. "Thank you, Henry. I needed to hear that. That's what friends are for, friends." The word warmed Eleanor's heart. She'd gained something more valuable than she'd ever imagined. Genuine friendship with people who valued her for who she was, not what she had. Eleanor made a decision. At the next board meeting, she announced she was stepping back from day-to-day operations of the tech company. She would remain as chairman of the board, but she was promoting her chief operating officer, Karen Stewart, to CEO. "This company is in excellent hands," Eleanor told the board. "Karen has been instrumental in our success, and she's ready for this role. My focus will be on the Forest Gift Foundation, which I believe has the potential to create lasting change in underserved communities across this country." Some board members were supportive. Others, like Brennan, were skeptical. But the transition happened, and Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The Forest Gift Foundation announced plans to open 3 more community centers across rural Colorado. The board, which now included Thomas as a full member, the youngest board member at 18, met to discuss the expansion strategy. "We need to be careful," Thomas said during the meeting. "The first center is still learning and adjusting. We've made mistakes. We should learn from them before expanding too quickly." Eleanor appreciated his caution. "What specific concerns do you have?" Thomas consulted his notes. He'd become more organized and professional over the past year. "First, ongoing maintenance costs are higher than we projected. Second, we underestimated the need for tech support. People need more hands-on help than we expected. Third, transportation is a bigger barrier than we realized. Some families can't get to the center because they don't have reliable vehicles. And fourth, we need to think about funding sustainability. What happens when the initial investment runs out?" These were all valid points. The board spent the next 4 hours working through each issue. They developed solutions: a shuttle service for people without transportation, hiring part-time tech support staff, creating a sustainable funding model that included community contributions, grant applications, and corporate partnerships alongside Eleanor's personal investment. "This is exactly why you're on this board, Thomas," Eleanor told him afterward. "You keep us from making expensive mistakes born of good intentions, but poor understanding." The 3 new centers were carefully planned over the next several months, each one adapted to the specific needs of its community. By the time Eleanor's rescue reached its 2-year anniversary, all 4 centers were operational and serving over 800 people combined. Thomas, now 19, had developed a comprehensive 6-month carpentry apprenticeship program. His first full cohort of 8 students graduated, and all 8 found employment or started their own small businesses. One of them, a young woman named Rebecca Chen, was so talented that Thomas hired her as his assistant instructor. Samuel, now 16, had just completed his junior year of high school with exceptional grades. He'd been taking college-level courses through an online program and had already accumulated 12 college credits. His passion for environmental science had grown, and he'd started a blog documenting the forest ecosystem around his home, which had attracted a small but dedicated following. Henry, now 74, had been able to address his chronic health issues thanks to connections the foundation had made. He'd had back surgery that significantly reduced his pain and had started physical therapy. He was moving better than he had in a decade. "I feel 20 years younger," Henry joked during one of Eleanor's monthly visits, "which only makes me about 54 instead of 74. But success brought scrutiny. A competing foundation focused on rural development published a report criticizing the Forest Gift Foundation's approach as unsustainable personal philanthropy that creates dependency rather than systemic change. The criticism hurt, especially because Eleanor worried there might be some truth to it. She brought the report to the foundation board. "Let's be honest about this," Martha Patterson said. "There's always going to be tension between providing help and fostering independence. But I spent 30 years in education, and I can tell you, our model works because we're not just handing people things. We're providing opportunities and training. People still have to do the hard work themselves." Carol Jennings, a community member who joined the board 6 months earlier, spoke up. "Before the center came, my daughter had no chance at college. Zero. Now she's starting community college this fall, studying nursing. Did Eleanor make that possible? Yes, but my daughter still had to maintain a B+ average, complete all her applications, and commit to the work. That's not dependency, that's opportunity," Thomas added. "And we're already seeing second-generation effects. People who got help through the foundation are now volunteering, mentoring others, giving back. That's the opposite of dependency." Eleanor felt reassured but knew they needed to keep evaluating and adjusting their approach. She commissioned an independent evaluation of the foundation's impact, insisting on complete honesty even if the findings were critical. The evaluation, completed 4 months later, was largely positive but offered valuable constructive criticism. The foundation incorporated the recommendations, including creating clearer pathways for graduates of their programs to become volunteers and mentors, and developing metrics to measure long-term community self-sufficiency. On the 2nd anniversary of Eleanor's rescue, the foundation organized a celebration at the original community center. Over 300 people attended, families who'd been helped by the foundation, volunteers, staff, donors, and community members. The center had grown. An addition had been built to accommodate the increasing demand, adding more classroom space and a small commercial kitchen where cooking classes were held. Eleanor stood before the crowd, Thomas and Samuel beside her. Thomas, now 19, stood tall and confident, no longer the uncertain teenager who'd found her in the woods. Samuel, 16, had grown several inches and was developing the same quiet strength as his brother. Henry sat in the front row, looking healthier and happier than he had in years. 2 years ago, Eleanor began, her voice strong and clear. "I was lost in the forest, injured and certain I was going to die. 2 young men found me, strangers who had every reason to pass me by. They were already struggling, already carrying more responsibility than most teenagers should bear. But they didn't hesitate, they helped me, and their grandfather welcomed me into his home." She paused, emotion thick in her voice. "I came here today to tell you that what they gave me was far more than physical rescue. They reminded me what it means to be human, to help without counting the cost, to live with integrity even when it's hard, to build real community." Samuel squeezed her hand supportively. "The Forest Gift Foundation exists because of them," Eleanor continued, "but it thrives because of all of you. In 2 years we've served over 800 people across 4 community centers. We've trained 67 people in various trades, helped 12 small businesses get started, and provided educational support to over 200 children and adults. But more importantly, we've proven that rural communities like this one are full of talent, resilience, and values that our broader society desperately needs." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Eleanor gestured for Thomas to speak. Thomas stepped forward, no longer nervous about public speaking. 2 years ago, I was just a kid who chopped wood and made furniture on the side. I had dreams but no real hope they'd come true. Today I run a successful carpentry program. I've trained dozens of people. I've started my own small business building custom furniture, and I'm part of something bigger than myself. He turned to Eleanor. Miss Eleanor, you saved us as much as we saved you, maybe more. You gave us opportunities we never thought possible. But more than that, you treated us as partners, not charity cases. You listened to us. You valued our input. That's what makes this foundation different. Samuel spoke next, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of youth tempered by growing maturity. I'm 16 now, and I'll be starting college courses next year through a combination of online classes and a community college 30 miles from here. I'm going to study environmental science and conservation. Me, a kid from a cabin in the woods with no money and limited access to education. If that can happen, anything can happen. That's what this foundation proves every day. Henry slowly stood, and the crowd quieted. His weathered face was serious as he looked around at the assembled people. I'm 74 years old, he began, his voice still strong despite his age. I've lived through hard times. I buried my son. I raised my grandsons on barely enough to get by. I've seen people struggle and fail through no fault of their own. But I've also seen what happens when someone genuinely cares. When someone sees you not as a problem to be solved but as a person with dignity and potential. He looked at Eleanor. Eleanor Hayes could have written us a check and forgotten about us. Instead, she's been here, month after month, learning from us as much as helping us. Building with us, not for us. That's rare, that matters, and it's changing lives. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, Eleanor found herself back at the Mitchell cabin with Thomas, Samuel, and Henry. The cabin had been extensively renovated over the past 2 years, new roof, insulation, solar panels, updated plumbing and electrical systems, but it still felt like home. The essence of the place hadn't changed. They sat around the fire, just the four of them, as they had that first night 2 years ago. Do you ever think about that day? Samuel asked. When we found you. All the time, Eleanor said. It was simultaneously the worst and best day of my life. The day I almost died, and the day I really started living. Thomas smiled. That's pretty profound, Miss Eleanor. It's true though, I had success, I had money, but I didn't have purpose. I didn't have genuine connections with people. I was succeeding at things that ultimately didn't matter while failing at things that did. Henry rocked in his chair, the familiar creaking sound comforting. Life's funny that way. Sometimes you have to lose everything, or almost lose everything, to figure out what you actually need. So what happens now? Samuel asked, leaning forward with the curiosity that defined him. The foundation is growing. You've got 4 centers, plans for more. Where does it go from here? Eleanor smiled. That's partly up to you two. Thomas, you're already on the board. Samuel, you'll join when you turn 18. This isn't my foundation, it's ours. It belongs to the communities it serves. I've been thinking about something, Thomas said slowly, his tone thoughtful. What if we expanded the model beyond Colorado? There are struggling rural communities across the whole country, places just like this one, full of good people who just need opportunity. I've thought about that too, Eleanor said, but we'd need to be very careful. What works here might not work elsewhere. We'd need local partners who really understand their communities, their specific challenges and strengths. People like Grandpa, Samuel said, gesturing to Henry. Exactly. In every community there are people like your grandfather, people with wisdom, integrity, and deep roots. We'd need to find them, build relationships with them, and empower them to lead locally. We can't just parachute in and impose solutions. That's a big vision, Henry observed. Would take years to build properly. We're ready for it, Thomas replied with confidence. Look what we've done in 2 years. Imagine what we could accomplish in 5 or 10. Eleanor looked around at their faces, these people who'd become family to her. The firelight flickered across their features, and she felt a deep sense of contentment. Whatever we do it together, she said firmly. That's non-negotiable. The foundation succeeds because it's built on authentic relationships and mutual respect. We lose that, we lose everything. Agreed, they said in unison, and the moment felt like a sacred promise. 5 years after that desperate day in the forest, when Thomas and Samuel Mitchell saved her life, Eleanor Hayes stood at the edge of the clearing, where their cabin still stood, restored but unchanged in its essential character. The forest around her was alive with the same sounds she'd heard during her ordeal: birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant babble of water over stones. But everything else had transformed in ways she could never have imagined that day. The Forest Gift Foundation now operated 16 community centers across 8 states: Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, Arkansas, West Virginia, Maine, and rural Michigan. They'd served over 4,000 people, provided scholarships to 83 students, and helped launch 137 small businesses in rural communities. Thomas, now 22 years old, was engaged to Rebecca Chen, the talented carpenter, who'd been his student and then his colleague. His apprenticeship program had become regionally recognized, training people in traditional woodworking crafts while adapting them for modern markets. He employed 7 people full-time and was preparing to open a second workshop location. His custom furniture had been featured in 2 national design magazines, bringing him clients from across the country. Samuel, now 19, had just completed his freshman year at Colorado State University, where he was studying wildlife biology and environmental science with a full scholarship from the foundation. He'd published an article on sustainable forest management in a peer-reviewed journal, remarkable for an undergraduate. He'd been recruited by several conservation organizations for summer internships, but had chosen to work with the foundation instead, developing their environmental education programs. Henry, now 78 years old, had officially retired from the foundation board, due to his age, but remained a beloved advisor. His health had improved dramatically after his surgery and ongoing physical therapy. He spent his time woodworking for pleasure, fishing, and serving as an informal grandfather figure to dozens of young people who came through the community center. They called him Uncle Henry, and he beamed with pride every time. Eleanor herself had fully transitioned away from her tech company, serving only as chairman emeritus. The Forest Gift Foundation was her life now, and she'd never been happier or more fulfilled. She'd moved from her Denver penthouse to a modest home much closer to the original Mitchell cabin, spending at least half of each month in the area. Today was special, the 5-year anniversary celebration. They were dedicating something new, an educational nature trail through the forest where Eleanor had been lost, with interpretive signage about the local ecosystem that Samuel had designed as part of his coursework. The whole community turned out for the dedication, over 400 people. Eleanor was moved to see familiar faces mixed with new ones, families she'd met over the years, teenagers who'd found direction through the programs, elderly residents who'd found community at the centers, success stories and ongoing struggles, all woven together into the complex tapestry of real community. Eleanor walked the trail with Thomas and Samuel, Henry following at a slower pace but steady. They reached the spot where the boys had found her. Eleanor had been able to identify it with certainty during a visit back the previous year. They'd marked it subtly, respectfully. A bench now sat there, crafted by Thomas from local oak, his finest work. A brass plaque was mounted on the backrest with a simple inscription: "In this place, strangers became family. May all who rest here remember that kindness changes lives, and that every person we meet carries infinite worth." "It's perfect," Eleanor whispered, running her hand along the smooth wood, marveling at the intricate grain Thomas had highlighted with his finishing technique. They sat together on the bench, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the trees in those familiar cathedral-like shafts. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said, her voice serious. "I've updated my estate plan. The foundation will receive the bulk of my assets when I die. We're talking about establishing an endowment that should sustain operations indefinitely. But more importantly, I've structured the governance so that the foundation will always be controlled by a board that includes residents of the communities it serves. It can never be taken over by outsiders who don't understand rural life." Thomas and Samuel looked at her with tears in their eyes. "You're not allowed to die," Samuel said, his voice breaking as he tried to joke through his emotion. Eleanor laughed, though her own eyes were misty. "I plan to live a long time yet, but I needed you to know, this work will continue long after I'm gone. That's what legacy means, building something that outlasts you and remains true to its founding principles." Henry joined them on the bench, settling down with a satisfied sigh. "You've done well, Eleanor. Better than well. You've changed lives, including your own. And you've built something that will keep changing lives for generations. Because you all changed mine first," Eleanor replied softly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the forest. A family hiking the new trail passed by, parents and 3 children. The children were excited, reading the educational signs aloud, asking questions their parents couldn't always answer but celebrated nonetheless. That's what it's all about, Thomas said quietly. The next generation having opportunities we didn't, knowing more, dreaming bigger, and never forgetting where they came from, Samuel added seriously. That's important too. Progress doesn't mean abandoning your roots or the values that matter, it means building on them. Eleanor felt profound peace settling over her. 5 years ago, she'd been lost in this forest, certain she was going to die. She'd been successful by every conventional measure, wealthy, accomplished, respected in her industry, but empty inside, disconnected from anything that truly mattered. Now she had purpose woven into every day. She had family, not by blood, but by choice and love, and shared commitment. She had work that made a tangible difference in people's lives. She'd helped thousands of people, yes, but more importantly, she'd built something that would continue helping people long after she was gone. The forest had stripped away everything superficial that day 5 years ago, leaving her with only what was essential: the need for genuine human connection, the transformative power of kindness, the critical importance of purpose beyond self-interest. "Thank you," she said quietly to the 3 men beside her, "for saving my life, for becoming my family, for showing me what actually matters in this world." "Thank you," Henry replied, his weathered hand patting hers, "for seeing value in a couple of poor boys and an old logger, for not just helping us but respecting us, treating us as equals, for building with us, not for us. That made all the difference." Thomas added, "You gave us opportunities, but you also gave us something more important. You believed in us. You saw who we could become when we couldn't see it ourselves." "I saw who you already were," Eleanor corrected gently. "I just helped remove some of the obstacles in your path." Samuel grinned, his expression carrying echoes of the 14-year-old boy who'd rushed to help a stranger in the woods. "Well, whatever it was, it worked. Look at us now, look at what we've built together." They looked at each other and laughed, genuine joyful laughter that echoed through the trees and seemed to merge with the forest itself. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber that made the whole world seem lit from within, they walked back together toward the community center. The building was clearly visible now from the trail, its lights glowing warmly as the evening programs began, a beacon of hope and possibility. Music drifted through the trees, someone teaching a guitar class. Children's laughter rang out from the expanded playground. The smell of fresh coffee and bread wafted from the small cafe that had opened in one corner of the building, providing job training for aspiring entrepreneurs. This was what genuine transformation looked like, Eleanor thought, not dramatic or flashy, but real and sustainable, rooted in authentic relationships and mutual respect, built on the foundation of one simple act of kindness that had rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. As they reached the community center, Eleanor turned for one last look at the forest. The trees stood tall and eternal, silent witnesses to everything that had transpired here. The forest that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, richer, deeper, more meaningful than anything she'd known in her previous existence. "Ready to head in?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward the center where the anniversary celebration was continuing. "They're about to start the slideshow of the past 5 years. Wouldn't miss it," Eleanor said, smiling. Inside, the center was packed with people. Eleanor had insisted on keeping the celebration community-focused rather than making it about her. The slideshow featured photos of program participants, success stories, community events, and the growth of the centers across multiple states. As images flashed across the screen, Thomas teaching his first carpentry class, Samuel leading children on a nature walk, Henry reading to kindergartners, families learning computer skills, seniors sharing traditional crafts with young people. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Rebecca, Thomas's fiancée, came over and handed her a tissue. "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" she said softly. "All this because 2 boys did the right thing 5 years ago, and because someone listened when we told her what we actually needed," Thomas added, overhearing. He'd walked up beside them. "You could have imposed solutions from the outside. Instead you asked questions and listened to the answers. That's why this works." Martha Patterson approached, looking as energized as ever despite being 72 years old now. Eleanor, there's someone I want you to meet. This is David Rodriguez. He drove here from New Mexico specifically for today's celebration. A man in his mid-30s stepped forward, extending his hand. Miss Hayes, I wanted to thank you in person. The center in our community opened 2 years ago. My daughter was struggling in school, falling through the cracks. The tutoring program at the center saved her. She just finished 8th grade with straight A's, and I enrolled in the welding certification program. I start my new job next week, double what I was making before. Eleanor shook his hand warmly. That's wonderful, but you did the work. The center just provided the tools. Maybe so, David said, his eyes bright with emotion. But without those tools, we wouldn't have had a chance. You gave us that chance. Throughout the evening, person after person approached Eleanor with similar stories. A 60-year-old woman who'd learned to use computers and now worked part-time at the local library. A young man who'd completed the carpentry apprenticeship and was now building his own home. A mother whose 3 children attended after-school programs at the center, giving her time to complete her nursing degree. Each story was a thread in the larger tapestry they'd woven together. Later that night, back at the cabin, the core group gathered one more time. Thomas, Samuel, Henry, Eleanor, and now Rebecca too. She'd become part of the family. They sat around the same fireplace where Eleanor had first felt warmth and safety 5 years ago. I have an announcement, Thomas said, glancing at Rebecca with a smile. We've set a date for the wedding. Next spring, and Miss Eleanor, we'd be honored if you'd be there. Not as the founder of the foundation, but as family. I'd be honored, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for including me, including you. Samuel laughed. Miss Eleanor, you are family. That happened a long time ago, Rebecca added. Thomas has told me the whole story so many times. How you could barely walk but insisted on helping around the cabin. How you asked questions about their lives instead of just talking about yourself. How you came back, again and again, to be part of the community instead of just writing checks from far away. That's not a donor, that's family. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by gratitude and love. These people had given her something she'd been missing her entire adult life. A sense of belonging, of being valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. I want to tell you all something, Eleanor said, looking around at their faces. Before I found myself lost in that forest, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd built a successful company, made a fortune, achieved everything I'd set out to achieve. But I was miserable in ways I didn't even fully recognize. I had no real relationships, no purpose beyond accumulation, no connection to anything larger than myself. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Lying on that forest floor, injured and alone, I had time to think about what I'd actually accomplished, and I realized that despite all my success, I hadn't done anything that would matter after I was gone. I hadn't touched anyone's life in a meaningful way. I hadn't built anything of lasting value. Thomas leaned forward, listening intently. Then you boys found me, Eleanor continued. And you did something extraordinary, not because you expected anything in return, not because you thought I could help you somehow, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That changed everything for me. It showed me what I'd been missing. Henry spoke up, his voice gentle. Eleanor, you need to understand something. What you saw in us, that willingness to help, that's not extraordinary around here. That's just how people are supposed to live. The extraordinary thing was that you recognized it, valued it, and let it change you. Most wealthy folks would have said thank you, gone back to their lives, and forgotten all about us. I couldn't forget, Eleanor said simply. You showed me a different way of being in the world. And I realized that with my resources, I could help create opportunities for people who had the same values, the same work ethic, the same potential that you all had, but who were being held back by circumstances beyond their control. Samuel, ever thoughtful, asked, what do you think has been the most important thing the foundation has accomplished? If you had to pick just one thing, Eleanor considered the question carefully. It's not the buildings, or the programs, or even the number of people we've served. The most important thing is that we've proven a model that works, that genuine partnerships between people with resources and people with lived experience can create lasting change. We've shown that rural communities aren't problems to be solved, but valuable parts of our society that deserve investment and respect, and we've done it without losing who we are.
Thomas added. The foundation hasn't tried to change rural communities into something they're not. It's helped them thrive as what they already are. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. That's what struck me when I first got involved. So many programs come in with an attitude of we know better than you. The Forest Gift Foundation actually listens, it adapts, it treats people with dignity. That's because Eleanor learned that from us, Henry said with a slight smile. She came in humble, willing to learn, and she's maintained that attitude even as the foundation has grown. They talked late into the night, sharing memories and dreams for the future. Samuel spoke excitedly about his research projects and how he wanted to integrate more environmental science education into the foundation's programs. Thomas discussed his vision for expanding the carpentry apprenticeship model to other trades, plumbing, electrical work, sustainable agriculture. Rebecca shared her own dream of creating a women's initiative within the foundation, providing specific support and networking for women in trades and rural entrepreneurship. There aren't a lot of women in carpentry, she said, but there could be more, if we remove some of the barriers and provide encouragement. Let's do it, Eleanor said immediately. That's an excellent idea. Why don't you develop a proposal? Henry mostly listened, his weathered face reflecting satisfaction at seeing his grandsons and their chosen family planning the future with such energy and hope. As midnight approached, Eleanor stood to leave. She had her own home nearby now, a modest place that felt more like home than her Denver penthouse ever had. Before I go, she said, I want to say one more thing. When I update people about the foundation, when I speak at conferences or meet with potential donors, I always tell them the same thing. This isn't my foundation. It belongs to the communities it serves. I'm just the person who had the resources to help launch it. But the vision, the values, the day-to-day work, that's all of us, together. She looked at each of them in turn. Thomas, you've become a remarkable leader and educator. Samuel, your passion for learning and sharing knowledge inspires everyone around you. Henry, your wisdom and integrity are the foundation's moral compass. And Rebecca, your fresh perspective and determination are already making a difference. And you, Thomas said, standing to give her a hug, you're the person who had the courage to change. To admit that despite all your success, something was missing. To open yourself to learning from people society told you to ignore or look down on. That's rare, Miss Eleanor, that matters. As Eleanor walked back to her home through the darkness, guided by the familiar path and a flashlight, she reflected on the incredible journey of the past 5 years. She thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the potential that had been unlocked, all the communities that had been strengthened, but more than any of that, she thought about how profoundly her own life had changed. She discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or square footage or business achievements. True wealth was measured in relationships, in purpose, in the knowledge that your life made a positive difference. She'd found family in the most unexpected place. She'd found purpose that gave every day meaning. She'd found a way to use her resources that actually mattered. The forest loomed around her in the darkness, but she wasn't afraid. This forest had given her everything that mattered. It had stripped away her illusions and shown her what was real. It had brought her to people who'd changed her life completely.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.